Hey everybody, Economic Ninja here. I hope you're doing great. Got a story out of CNBC I just noticed. It's about the debt default, and it's about a warning that Jamie Dimon has just given. Now, to say Jamie Dimon is the smartest guy in the room, it's an understatement. He runs pretty much the biggest bank now. It's getting bigger and bigger every day, and he is in the know, right? Why? Because he probably writes the rules. And he's really tied into the Federal Reserve System. And there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of swaying of your emotions and your opinion right now because of rhetoric and narrative that's being forced on you all over right now. And right now, what's trending in the news is the debt ceiling. Now, we've seen time and time again that debt ceiling being used to force unwanted and unneeded regulation down our throats as the American people. But what always happens? They extend the debt. They extend it every time. And there's been some times before where we've seen continuing resolution and stuff like that, where it gets tougher, but ultimately everything's fine. I mean, it's been insane. In the past, you've literally seen, like, what was it, President Obama come out and say, we're sending all the government employees home. This is getting serious. They sent them home and they still paid them. For heaven's sakes, you literally wasted money. You made it even worse. And we've seen this over and over and over again. But this article that I'm going to read you, I think, is pretty important because I believe part of it. Check this out. All right. Jamie Dimon warns panic will overtake U.S. Will overtake markets as the U.S. approaches debt default. Says right here, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said Thursday that markets will be gripped by panic as the U.S. approaches a possible default on its sovereign debt. An actual default would be potentially catastrophic for the country, Dimon told Bloomberg in a televised interview. Dimon said he expects that worst-case scenario will be avoided. However, because lawmakers will be forced to respond to growing concern. So right there, he told you, ultimately, this is going to get resolved, right? But now think about this. This is actually happening in the middle of a massive banking crisis. Massive, massive, massive banking crisis. On top of that, I did a story the other day where the Saudis, a big Saudi fund tied to the royal family, literally is putting multi billions of short positions on our stock market right now. The world is wanting to watch us collapse. The world wants it. The world is walking away from the dollar. This is very, 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 very serious times. All right. On top of that, we're gripped with inflation. To say this is different than all the other times is an understatement. It says here, the closer you get to it, you will have panic in the form of stock market volatility and upheavals in treasuries, he said. Dimon joined a host of business figures and administration officials making dire predictions about the consequences of failing to raise the suspend the U.S. debt limit and allowing the world's largest economy to default on its bonds. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said the idea that the country could default should be unthinkable and would lead to economic disaster. I completely and utterly agree with that. I do totally agree with that. Here's the quote from Dimon. If it gets to that panic point, people have to react. We've seen that before. But it is a really bad idea because panic becomes something that is not good. He added, it could affect other markets around the world. So think about right now just how people are viewing gold and silver and Bitcoin and as alternatives to the dollar, right? Not saying they're going to become alternatives to the dollar, but they're also starting to pull money out of their bank accounts. They're starved for yield. And if there is any kind of thought, think about this, another country that's holding our T-bills, that the government may default on them. What if they started dumping them? Just think about that. What kind of scenario? Put down what your worst case scenario would be if a government thought, you know what, the heck with it. Let's take a 10, 20, 30% cut on our treasuries. We got to walk away from this. I mean, it's just, and think about it. Also, they're watching our news super closely and they're watching arguing going on behind or right in front. It's like kabuki theater to me, but it's literally each side of the aisle. Both sides are just screaming and yelling at each other, arguing. And if countries are sitting back looking at this and like they're okay, the US is already in a banking default right now. It's getting bad. They got a full-blown bank crisis and bank bailout going on right now, right? The government's had to step in. The FDIC has had to step in and take over banks. We're watching their inflation running hot. We're watching them lose currency status with all these other countries. Why wouldn't they default right now? They've sort of got a rogue government right now that's acting different than any other government, any other White House in the last 50, 60 years. And what I mean by that is where in the past, when a government outside the US said, you know what, we're going to stop selling our oil or buying oil in dollars, we're going to use a different currency, there would be immediate war. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it, especially since the year 2000. It was immediate. Even if governments came out and said, like leaders said, I want gold for dollars or for oil. I don't want dollars anymore. Or hey, I want euros for oil. I don't want any dollars anymore for the oil I produce. There was a war, an attack immediately. And so these governments are looking at this, our current administration going, they're totally different. So this time might be different. And that's why I think it's important to really be aware of what's going on, because Jamie Dimon's right. As they get closer, the war drums are going to beat louder, and the media is going to really, really push this even farther. So I want you to consider that when you're thinking about how you're prepping and stuff. And how do you prep for something like this? Honestly, no one can ever tell you the real true way to do this, but you just need to get out of debt and you need to save some food, get a water filter. Like, things are going to get tough. I can tell you that for sure. Things are going to get tougher. We're not out of the woods. And Jamie Dimon was on record a while back, a couple weeks ago, saying the first phase of this banking crisis is over. That was because he bought First Republic, I believe. He's like, all right, we're done. We accomplished the first one. We sucked up that bank's uh, uh, assets for pennies on the dollar. We're good. But he did say, but that's the first phase. There's way more to come. And usually, if you remember past corrections in the past, recessions or crashes, the first couple of phases are usually pretty mellow. So if you think this is bad, because it gets worse, if you think this is bad, you're going to be blown away with what happens later this year in the fall. All right, guys, I hope you got something out of this. I'll put some links to companies I use for the water filter I bought and the where I buy my gold and all that stuff. Not saying you need to use them, but in case you want to check them out, please feel free. I've used them all, and they're companies that I trust. And that's one thing that's big these days, is gaining trust. All right, with that being said, the Economic Ninja is out.